In chemistry, we refer to different molecules using a wide variety of different terms and systems of naming. For example, in ionic compounds, we've already learned that we use the cation's name combined with the anion's name. With covalent compounds, however, the complex structures that can form mean we usually need different rules. Fortunately, many covalent compounds fall under the category of binary covalent compounds. These are structures that are made up of just two atoms, combined in a way where they're bonded covalently. Let's look at an example. This is an example of a binary covalent compound, and we can see that because it contains two different atoms, nitrogen, represented by the capital N, and oxygen, represented by the capital O. Furthermore, we can see that this compound has two nitrogens and four oxygens. Now, unlike ionic compounds, which only have one possible correct formula if you want the cations and anions to cancel each other out, covalent compounds can have more than one structure depending on how many of each atoms are present and whether we see single, double, or triple bonds. So when we name this compound, we have to be specific to how many of each element are present. And for that, we use a prefix. The prefix are just terms that go in front of the name of the element to tell us how many there are. And you probably recognize some prefixes right away. For one, we use the prefix mono, meaning if there's just one of those atoms present, we'll start with the term mono. If there's two of that atom, we use di. If there's three of that atom, we use tri. And the remaining ones are tetra, penta, hexa, hepta, octa, nona, and deca. You probably recognize many of these, and in fact, you might not be aware that the months October, November, and December used to be the 8th, 9th, and 10th months of the year, which is where they got their names from. But back to the chemistry. To put together our name, our very first element will get the prefix indicated by the number of atoms. The second element will also have a prefix before it, but the second element will also get an ending. And this ending, much like what we saw in ionic compounds, is the "ide" ending, I-D-E. So when we put the name together, our first element will still have its full name, but the second element will have the ending IDE. This is the same as what we encountered when we did anions. So instead of fluorine, we'll have fluoride. Instead of oxygen, we'll have oxide. Don't be too concerned about exactly the right spelling, just see what sounds right and most likely you'll be correct. Let's see how we'll write out the name for N2O4. My first step is to write the prefix for my first element, which is nitrogen. There's two of the nitrogens, so I'm going to use the prefix di. Then I write the name of the element. I don't make any changes to it at all. We usually write these as two words, so you can leave a space before going on to the prefix for my second element. The prefix for my oxygen, because there are 4 oxygen atoms, should be tetra. But when it comes to elements that start with a vowel, it's common to drop the A off this prefix because tetraox is harder to say than tetrox. Also, remember, I'm not going to write the whole second name of the element. I'm going to have to cut the ending off of it and add the ending ide or IDE. So I'm going to go ahead and write my prefix. I'm going to write the prefix instead of tetra, I'll just write tetra and then start to write oxygen. But I have to use the IDE ending. For oxygen, this becomes oxide. So my final name is dinitrogen tetraoxide. Now that we've got the idea behind binary covalent naming, I just want to point out one really important exception to these rules. You'll see that the prefix for one, mono, has an asterisk next to it. And that's because there's one case where you won't use this prefix. That's when it's for the very first element. In other words, we never start the name of a covalent compound with the term mono for binary covalent naming. And you kind of already know this, because this molecule is something that you have never ever called monocarbon dioxide. We just call it carbon dioxide. If there's no prefix to the first element, we assume it's an implied one. Basically, we assume there's only one of those elements. So this is carbon dioxide, not monocarbon dioxide. We do use the prefix mono if it applies to the second element. So closely related to carbon dioxide is this compound. This is carbon monoxide because the mono here is applied to the second element. We can omit it for the first element, carbon, but we need to include it for the second element. Okay, let's do a practice. Name this compound. You can pause the video if you need to. This compound is called nitrogen trifluoride. Let's look at why. The nitrogen, there's only one of them, and because it's the first element in the formula, we're not going to use mono, so we didn't call this mononitrogen, just nitrogen. The second element was fluorine. Because it's the second element, we have to change the ending, and the most common way that's done is fluoride. There's 3 of them, so trifluoride for the second element. This compound's nitrogen trifluoride. So now you're ready to do binary covalent naming.